The DNA results arrived on a cold November morning, and they shattered every lie Faith Burton had told. The baby she was carrying belonged to Stephen Parker, not her murdered husband Matthew. This wasn't just an affair that went wrong. This was a carefully planned execution, orchestrated by two lovers who thought they could start a new life together over Matthew Burton's grave. But Stephen Parker had made one fatal mistake. In his rush to flee Tennessee, he left behind a digital trail that would lead investigators straight to him. Phone records revealed the shocking truth. Faith and Stephen had been planning Matthew's murder for weeks. Text messages, voice recordings, and location data painted a picture of cold-blooded conspiracy that would send both killers to death row. This is how modern technology caught two murderers who thought they were smarter than the law. Stephen Parker was captured 72 hours after the DNA results came back. He had been hiding in a rundown motel outside Birmingham, Alabama, paying cash and using a fake name. But his burner phone betrayed him. When Stephen called Faith's sister to ask about Faith's condition, the call was traced within minutes. Alabama State Police and federal marshals surrounded the Sunset Motel at 3 a.m. Stephen didn't resist arrest, but he wasn't going down alone. Within hours of his capture, he was making a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for life in prison instead of the death penalty, Stephen Parker agreed to tell the whole truth about Matthew Burton's murder. What he revealed shocked even experienced investigators. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a methodical assassination planned down to the last detail by two people who saw murder as their ticket to happiness.
Faith came to me 3 weeks before it happened and said Matthew was getting suspicious about the pregnancy. She was scared he'd figure out the baby wasn't his and throw her out with nothing. We talked about running away together, but Faith said she needed Matthew's life insurance money first. That's when she suggested we make it look like a robbery. I didn't want to kill him at first, but Faith kept pushing, saying it was the only way we could be together. She mapped out Matthew's routine, told me exactly when he'd be outside checking the animals. The night it happened, Faith left the back door unlocked and turned off the porch light like we planned. I waited in the woods until Matthew came out. Then I confronted him about Faith and the baby. He tried to fight me, so I shot him twice. Faith was supposed to wait 10 minutes before calling 911 to give me time to get away. We thought it was the perfect plan. We thought no one would ever connect us to the murder. But we were stupid. You can't hide from technology. Every phone call, every text message, every lie we told was recorded somewhere. Faith convinced me that murder was our only option. And now, we're both going to prison for the rest of our lives.
When Faith Burton learned that Stephen Parker had confessed and implicated her as the mastermind, she collapsed in her jail cell. The woman who had convinced investigators she was a grieving widow was now exposed as a cold-blooded killer who had manipulated her lover into committing murder. Faith's attorney immediately requested a plea deal, but prosecutors weren't interested. The evidence was overwhelming. Phone records showed Faith had researched Matthew's life insurance policy 2 weeks before the murder. She had Googled how long before life insurance pays out and widow inheritance rights in Tennessee. Most damning of all were voice messages Stephen had saved on his phone. In them, Faith could be heard saying, "Matthew would never divorce me, but if something happened to him, I'd inherit everything. We could start fresh somewhere new." The Grieving Widow Act was over. Faith Burton was revealed as a master manipulator who had orchestrated her husband's execution. FBI computer analysts uncovered a digital conspiracy that spanned months. Faith and Stephen had used multiple apps to communicate, thinking they could hide their planning from investigators. But deleted messages were recovered from cloud backups. Location data from their phones proved they had met secretly dozens of times to plan the murder. Most shocking was a voice memo Faith had recorded on her phone 3 days before the killing. In it, she practiced her 911 call, rehearsing her hysterical reaction to finding Matthew's body. Stephen had taken photos of the Burton farm layout, marking Matthew's nightly routine and escape routes. They had even researched how long Matthew would take to die from gunshot wounds to ensure he couldn't identify his killer. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated execution planned by two people who saw murder as their path to a better life together. The revelation that Faith Burton had masterminded her husband's murder sent shockwaves through Millfield County. Neighbors who had brought casseroles and flowers to the grieving widow now realized they had been comforting a killer. Matthew's parents publicly stated they felt betrayed and manipulated by Faith's performance. At Barney's diner, conversations turned from sympathy for Faith to horror at her deception. Local pastor James Morrison said he had counseled Faith about her grief, never suspecting she was the one responsible for it. The tight-knit farming community struggled to accept that someone they had known for years was capable of such evil. Many residents admitted they would never look at their neighbors the same way again. The Burton farm, once a symbol of hard work and family values, became a crime scene that reminded everyone how well people can hide their true nature.
Our son Matthew was a good man who worked hard and loved his family. He trusted Faith completely, and she used that trust to destroy him. When we first heard about the affair, we were angry, but we thought maybe they could work it out. Marriage has ups and downs, and we believed in forgiveness. But when we learned that Faith had planned his murder, that she had manipulated that poor man Stephen into killing our boy, we realized we never really knew her at all. Matthew was so excited about becoming a father. He had already bought a crib and started painting the nursery. He spent his last weeks planning for a baby that wasn't even his, loving a wife who was plotting his death. Faith sat in our living room after the funeral, holding our hands and crying about how much she missed Matthew. She attended his funeral and gave a eulogy about what a wonderful husband he was, all while knowing she had arranged his murder. We trusted her with our grief, and she betrayed us even in death. We hope she gets the death penalty. Matthew deserves justice, and Faith Burton deserves to pay for what she's done to our family.
Investigators discovered that Faith Burton had secretly increased Matthew's life insurance policy from $100,000 to $500,000 just 6 months before the murder. She had told the insurance agent that Matthew was worried about providing for their future family. The agent remembered Faith asking detailed questions about when benefits would be paid and whether affairs would affect payouts. Faith had also researched Tennessee inheritance laws and discovered that as Matthew's widow, she would inherit the farm and all his assets. Her Google search history revealed the cold calculation behind her loving wife facade. She had searched for Black widow murders, how to fake grief, and couples who killed for insurance money. Faith Burton hadn't just wanted to escape her marriage, she had wanted to profit from her husband's death. The life insurance policy was the smoking gun that proved this murder was about money, not passion. District Attorney Rebecca Shaw built an airtight case against Faith Burton. The evidence was overwhelming: DNA proof of the affair, digital records of murder planning, financial motive through life insurance, and Stephen Parker's detailed confession. Shaw argued that Faith was the true mastermind who had manipulated Stephen into committing murder, while she maintained plausible deniability. The prosecution showed that Faith had researched every aspect of the crime, from insurance payouts to alibis to grief counseling. Shaw told the jury that Faith Burton was one of the most calculating killers she had ever prosecuted. This wasn't a woman driven by passion or fear. This was a predator who had used her husband's love and trust to plan his execution. The prosecution sought the death penalty for Faith and life imprisonment for Stephen, arguing that both deserved the maximum punishment for their premeditated conspiracy to commit murder.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Faith Burton is not the monster the prosecution wants you to believe she is. Yes, she had an affair. Yes, she made terrible decisions that led to tragedy. But she is not a cold-blooded killer. Faith Burton is a victim of Stephen Parker's manipulation and control. Stephen Parker is a predator who targeted a vulnerable woman in an unhappy marriage. He isolated her from her family, convinced her that Matthew was standing in the way of their happiness, and pressured her into a conspiracy she never wanted to be part of. The prosecution wants you to believe that Faith planned this murder, but the evidence shows Stephen Parker was the driving force behind every decision. Faith's internet searches don't prove she planned a murder, they prove she was a confused woman trying to understand her legal options during a difficult time. When Stephen told her he was going to confront Matthew, Faith tried to stop him by sending warning texts. She didn't want violence. She wanted Stephen to stay away. Faith Burton is guilty of adultery and poor judgment, but she is not guilty of murder. Don't let the prosecution's thirst for vengeance blind you to the truth. Faith Burton is a victim, not a killer.
The jury deliberated for 3 days while Millfield County held its breath. Media trucks lined Main Street as reporters covered every development in the trial. Matthew's family maintained a vigil outside the courthouse, holding photos of their murdered son. Faith's mother appeared on television, pleading for mercy for her daughter, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury had seen Faith's internet searches, heard Stephen's confession, and listened to the voice messages where Faith discussed Matthew's death. On the third day, the jury reached a verdict. As they filed back into the courtroom, Faith Burton sat motionless beside her attorney. The forewoman stood and delivered the decision that would seal Faith's fate. The community that had once rallied around the grieving widow was about to learn whether justice would be served for Matthew Burton's cold-blooded murder. Faith Burton, the jury has found you guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. The evidence presented in this case reveals a level of premeditation and manipulation that shocks the conscience. You exploited your husband's love and trust to plan his execution. You manipulated Stephen Parker into committing murder while maintaining your own plausible deniability. You increased Matthew's life insurance policy and researched inheritance laws to profit from his death. Most despicably, you attended his funeral and comforted his grieving family while knowing you were responsible for their pain. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Stephen Parker, for your role in this conspiracy, you are sentenced to life in prison without parole. You both betrayed the most fundamental bonds of love and trust. Matthew Burton deserved better than the two people who claim to care about him. Justice has been served. 6 months after the trial, the Burton family farm was sold to pay legal expenses and victim compensation. Matthew's parents used the proceeds to establish a scholarship fund in their son's memory. Faith Burton's baby was born in prison and placed for adoption with a loving family who would never know the circumstances of the child's conception. Stephen Parker and Faith Burton began serving their life sentences at different maximum security prisons in Tennessee. They would never see each other again, their toxic love affair having destroyed multiple lives, including their own. A young farming family from Georgia purchased the Burton property and began rebuilding the life that Matthew had envisioned. The land that had witnessed such tragedy would once again become a symbol of hope, hard work, and honest living. In the judgment room, we've seen how digital evidence exposes even the most carefully planned conspiracies. Technology doesn't lie. People do. And justice always finds a way.